Welcome. You are on the right channel. King Umaru of Zaza was a lion among men. His presence filled every room before he even spoke, and when he did, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. With a heart as vast as the skies and a will as strong as iron, he ruled not with cruelty, but with wisdom and unshakable strength. Under his reign, Zaza flourished. Its rivers teemed with fish, its markets bustled with traders, and its fields glowed gold with ripe millet. But prosperity breeds envy. And so, in dark corners of the kingdom, bitter chiefs, envious nobles, and distant lords whispered and plotted. They watched King Umaru's steady rule and grew restless, waiting for the day he might stumble. Still, the king never feared. Whenever warned of rumors or treachery, he would smile faintly and say, "Such is life. No matter how good you are, human beings will always be human." His faith lay not in the loyalty of men, but in the strength of his own heart, and in the future he had shaped through his only son, Prince Shedema. Prince Shedema was the pride of Zaza, a young man whose bravery on the battlefield matched his kindness among the people. Tall and broad-shouldered, with fierce eyes softened by compassion, he had been raised not only as a warrior, but as a son of the people. The old women who sold kola nuts in the market, the blacksmiths who toiled under the blazing sun, the shepherd boys who chased goats across the hills, all loved him. When the drums of war sounded on the kingdom's northern borders, Shedema, barely 20, had led the army himself. For weeks, the air was thick with the scent of burning wood and the cries of battle. Yet it was Shedema who returned victorious, the enemy broken and the borders secured. The day he returned, Zaza erupted with joy. Drums pounded like rolling thunder. Women wrapped in bright wrappers danced in the streets, their ululations piercing the skies. Children threw petals along the paths as Shedema rode through the village gates, the late afternoon sun crowning him in gold. It was then, amidst the blinding joy, that Shedema saw her. She stood by the roadside, barefoot, her wrapper dusted with the powder of the red earth. She was selling sweetened millet from a wooden tray balanced carefully on her head. Her skin glowed, kissed by the sun, and her eyes, deep, clear, unafraid, met his. Asabe. In that fleeting moment, the world around Shedema melted away. No roaring crowd, no royal duty, no future burdens existed. Only the quiet force of her gaze. From that day forward, no daughter of any chief, no princess from a far-off land, could touch the place Asabe now held in his heart. But love is a dangerous seed in royal soil. The chiefs, men who had waited eagerly to marry their daughters into royalty, were furious. Their dreams of rising higher, of gaining influence over the throne through their daughters, crumbled before their eyes. Envy turned to anger. They convened in secret meetings under the cover of night, their torches hissing in the darkness. They spoke in bitter tones, plotting to undo Shedema's heart and bend him to their will. He must not marry that common girl, hissed Chieftain Lottie, his face twisted with rage. The blood of kings must not mix with the blood of the market, sneered Chief Adamu. Poisonous words, like venomous snakes, slithered into the ears of courtiers, advisors, and even the household guards. But Shedema, taught by his father to trust little and watch much, stayed silent. He observed. He listened. He saw the greed flickering in their eyes, the false smiles they wore like ill-fitting masks. Still, love burned in his chest like a sacred fire. And so, after many sleepless nights, he knelt before his father in the great chamber, the flickering lamps casting long shadows along the walls. "Father," he said, voice steady, "I have found the one my heart belongs to. Her name is Asabe, daughter of no noble house, but a jewel among women." King Umaru, seated upon his carved throne, steepled his fingers and looked down at his son. His gaze was not angry nor cruel, only heavy, burdened with the weight of kingship. "A king must marry from strength, not from the heart," he said gravely. "Your enemies circle you like vultures. They watch for weakness. Love is a treasure, yes, but in the court of men, it is also a blade at your throat." With that, he forbade the union. Prince Shedima bowed low, his face hidden, his heart shattering into 1,000 silent pieces. Yet he did not argue. He was a son of Zaza, and duty ran through his veins as surely as blood. He withdrew. He built walls around his heart, but no wall, however thick, could kill the seed that had already taken root inside him. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the kingdom, the enemies of Zaza sharpened their plans. The chiefs whispered even louder, their ambitions growing bold. They sowed unrest among the traders and fear among the farmers. They plotted not only the downfall of Shedima's heart, but of the very throne itself. And the king, in his wisdom and sorrow, still sat tall and unbowed, whispering only, "Such is life. No matter how good you are, human beings will always be human." In Zaza, the storm had begun to gather, and though few saw it yet, it would soon shake the kingdom to its very foundations. Trouble fell on Zaza like a sudden storm from a cloudless sky. The first sign came quietly. The western fields of millet, once thick and gold, burned to ash under mysterious fire. No lightning had fallen, no careless farmer had left a flame. Yet the field smoldered, black and dead. Then, the wells, lifeblood of the village, turned sour. The water, once sweet and clear, became bitter. Some said they saw dark figures slipping near the water under cover of night, throwing things into the deep. Next came the markets. In broad daylight, armed men, their faces hidden, stormed through the stalls, tearing down goods, stealing grains, and beating those who resisted. The traders cried to the heavens, and fear spread faster than the smoke of the burned fields. In the king's court, whispers stirred like restless spirits. The chiefs, those who had once sworn loyalty, now whispered loud enough to be heard. They pointed fingers, subtly but surely, at King Amaru. They murmured that he had lost the favor of the gods, that his rule had grown weak, that perhaps for the good of Zaza, a new hand should guide the kingdom. King Amaru, weathered but not broken, saw it all. His enemies no longer hid their contempt. His own heart, bruised by betrayal and the bitter refusal between father and son, grew heavy. His shoulders, once proud and broad, seemed weighed down by invisible chains. Then came the fever. It struck swiftly like an assassin. Confined to his chambers, King Amaru fought bravely. Even as his body weakened, his mind remained sharp. He summoned his advisors, made rulings from his bed, refused to surrender the dignity of his throne. Yet those closest to him, true men of honor, saw the light dimming in his eyes. In his final days, he called for Shedima. The young prince knelt by his father's bedside. The old king, his skin ashen, placed a trembling hand on his son's shoulder. His voice, though weak, carried the same gravity it always had. "The world is full of jackals, my son. They were the faces of friends and the tongues of snakes. Rule not with hatred, but with wisdom. Trust little, watch much, but never lose your heart." Tears welled in Shedima's eyes, but he held his father's gaze until the very end. King Amaru passed as he lived with dignity. The royal drums of mourning echoed across the hills and valleys of Zaza. Women shaved their heads. Men painted their bodies in ash. Songs of sorrow filled the air for 7 days and 7 nights. Before the last echo faded, a new sound rose, the pounding of new drums, drums of coronation. Prince Shedima, at 23, ascended the throne. A young king crowned in both grief and purpose. His heart carried the weight of his father's teachings, and his eyes burned with a fire that promised he would not be easily broken. The kingdom gathered in the great hall on a night when no moon lit the sky. Hundreds filled the vast chamber, their faces shadowed by torchlight. The chiefs sat in their heavy robes, their gold ornaments glinting, hiding their growing anxiety. All expected the new king to announce a political marriage, to strengthen his reign with alliances, to pick a daughter from among them. Their daughters sat poised and smiling, their father's dreams painted across their faces. But Shedema had not forgotten. His heart had made a vow long before power ever touched his hands. He stood tall before his people, voice steady, words like thunder. "I will marry no princess, no daughter of ambition," he declared. "I will marry for love, as my father once married for duty. I choose Asabe, daughter of the earth, daughter of Zaza." Gasps filled the hall. The chiefs shifted in their seats, their faces hardening like stone. Whispers slithered through the air. Anger burned behind their false smiles. Their carefully built plans crumbled into dust before their eyes. But Shedema did not flinch. He married Asabe within the week. The wedding was unlike any seen before. Not grand with foreign guests or extravagant displays of wealth, but pure and joyous. The villagers sang, the old women danced barefoot in the dust, and the markets overflowed with gifts of food and cloth. Yet even as drums of joy filled the air, the drums of conspiracy beat louder in secret. The chiefs, humiliated and enraged, knew another path must be taken. If they could not sway the king's heart, they would strike at the root, his marriage. They found an ally in the shadows of the palace, Zainabu, Asabe's own maid. Greedy and bitter, Zainabu was easily bought with promises of gold and land. The plan was simple but cruel. Each day, Zainabu slipped cursed powders into the queen's meals and oils. Secret potions brewed to block her womb, to keep her belly flat and empty. Night after night, Asabe waited with hope in her heart. Month after month, she prayed under the stars, her hands resting on a silent womb. But no child came, and so the whispers began. "A barren queen cannot sit on Zaza's throne," muttered the market women. "The gods frown upon her," said the men at the palm wine stalls. Perhaps the chiefs were right after all, the elders began to wonder. In the palace, tension grew as thick as the humid air. The chiefs pressed harder. According to ancient law, if a queen could not produce an heir within 2 years, she could be sent away and another bride chosen. Everywhere Asabe walked, she felt the weight of unseen eyes, the murmur of pity, the sting of silent accusations. Alone in her chambers at night, she wept, not just for herself, but for Shedema, who carried the burden with her, quietly, proudly, refusing to show weakness before the court. The trap was closing, and in the gathering storm, the fate of Zaza itself hung in the balance. The days grew heavier in Zaza, thick with whispers and half-truths. Though Queen Asabe walked the palace halls with dignity, the murmurs behind her back grew louder. The chiefs, seeing their earlier schemes crumble, grew more desperate. They gathered their daughters once more, adorning them in silk spun from distant lands, draping them in gold and jewels that glittered like fallen stars. Each girl was a pawn, each smile a weapon sharpened for seduction. But King Shedema's heart remained anchored to Asabe. Unable to break his loyalty with charms and beauty, the chiefs turned to darker plots. They whispered into the ear of the king's uncle, a man hungry for recognition, promising him a place of power beside a new queen if he would join their cause. Tempted by visions of grandeur, the uncle bent his knee to betrayal. It was not long before the poison of conspiracy spread beyond the palace. Market women, once loyal, began to echo the chief's wicked words. Elders at the court, who had sworn oaths of loyalty, now shuffled nervously and avoided the queen's gaze. Even children, who once played joyfully at the palace gates, grew cautious, as if sensing the winds of change. "The queen cannot bear a child," they said in hushed tones. "She is a curse upon the throne. She must leave." The Council of Elders, pressured by the chiefs and their allies, called for a judgment. They declared that if the queen remained barren, she must be cast aside, as tradition demanded an heir to secure the throne of Zaza. The Great Hall was summoned for the judgment, a place once meant for justice, now filled with treachery. Nobles, merchants, warriors, and villagers flooded the chamber, their faces a mixture of curiosity, pity, and hidden malice. The chiefs sat in the front rows, their daughters at their sides, faces masked in false humility, hearts pounding with ambition. Queen Asabe stood at the center, her head held high despite the weight pressing down on her. She wore no jewelry, no crowns, only the truth shining in her eyes. Yet truth alone felt a fragile armor against the tide rising to swallow her. As the High Elder rose to pronounce the sentence, a final cruel drumbeat in the queen's ears, King Shedema stood from his throne. The hall froze. His voice, low yet filled with the rumble of distant thunder, broke through the tense air. "Stop." The elder's mouth clamped shut. All eyes turned to the king. You could have heard the fall of a feather in that moment. Shedema descended the dais slowly, each step a hammer blow against the walls of conspiracy. He turned to the royal guards and gave a slight nod. They disappeared for a moment behind the towering doors and returned leading a small figure. A boy, no more than 6 years old. He walked with the calm assurance of someone born to command, despite his tender age. His eyes, bright and sharp, mirrored Shedema's own, unmistakable proof of his bloodline. Gasps rippled through the hall like a breaking wave. King Shedema lifted the boy onto the platform so all could see and declared in a voice that left no room for doubt. "This is my son, my blood, born long before my father's death, hidden away for his protection, hidden from traitors who wished to see my family destroyed." A stunned silence held the crowd captive. Queen Asabe, overwhelmed by emotion, fell to her knees and opened her arms. The boy leaped into them, and she clutched him fiercely, her tears falling like rain upon his small shoulders. The sight shattered the lies that had been woven around her like chains. The chiefs, their faces drained of color, began to shift uncomfortably. King Shedema turned to them, his face carved from stone. "You, who called yourselves counselors and protectors of this throne, have plotted its ruin. You poisoned the ears of my kin. You fed my queen cursed food to steal her future. You sowed betrayal in the soil of Zaza." His gaze sharpened like a blade. "But today, the harvest you sowed will be your undoing." At his signal, the guards swept into action. One by one, the conspirators were seized. The chiefs who had poisoned the court with lies, the uncle who betrayed blood for ambition, the maid who had tampered with the queen's meals, and even the royal cook who had dared to serve poison at the table of Zaza. Cries of shock and protest rose, but the people drowned them out with their roars of approval. The marketplace women beat their drums. The warriors banged their shields. Even the sky seemed to join in as thunder rumbled in the distance. Justice, swift and merciless, poured over the guilty like a river in flood. Some were thrown into the darkest dungeons of the palace, their names stripped from the records of honor. Others were banished beyond the borders of the kingdom, left to wander the wilderness and taste the bitterness of their own treachery. For the first time in many moons, the palace breathed freely. Light filled the once-shadowed halls. Music returned to the squares. And the queen, their queen, walked proudly among her people once again. King Shedema, standing tall above the gathered throng, declared, "In Zaza, loyalty shall no longer be bought with gold nor traded with lies. From today forward, truth shall be our shield and love our sword." The people, their faith restored, knelt before him, chanting his name as the drums of victory echoed into the heavens. Thus, the storm that had nearly torn the kingdom apart passed. The sun began its slow, golden climb over Zaza once more, heralding a dawn more beautiful and promising than any the kingdom had ever known. The reign of truth had begun. The storm had passed. But it was not until months later that Zaza truly tasted the sweetness of a new beginning. The palace, once heavy with fear and suspicion, now echoed with laughter and songs. The people walked taller. Merchants smiled as they weighed goods in the markets. Children ran freely through the streets, their laughter like music in the sun. The land itself seemed to sigh in relief under the new king's just hand. Then came the morning that changed everything. It began just before dawn, when the stars still clung to the velvet sky. Inside the palace, hurried footsteps whispered across the polished floors. The midwives had been summoned. Queen Asabe's time had come. Torches flickered. The air was thick with hope and prayer. The women of the palace, cooks, maids, noble women, gathered outside the queen's chambers, hands clutched together, hearts pounding. Silent prayers rose into the sky. Inside, Asabe fought like the queen she was. Hours passed, hours of pain, courage, and unwavering spirit. And then, as the first light of morning spilled golden across the horizon, a cry pierced the air. The sharp, glorious cry of a newborn. The palace erupted in cheers. But before the echoes of the first cry had faded, a second cry followed. Another child, another miracle. Twins, a boy and a girl. Two radiant souls, born into a world their parents had fought so hard to heal. The news spread through Zaza like wildfire. Drums thundered in every corner. Bells rang from the hilltops. Dancers spilled into the streets, their feet kicking up the red dust as they sang praises to the heavens. Women ululated so loudly that even the birds took to the skies in startled flight. From the farthest farms to the edge of the royal palace, the people of Zaza knew a blessing had been given to them. In the grand courtyard, where once betrayal had lurked, now joy stood proudly. King Shedema emerged, his face aglow, carrying his infant son swaddled in rich cloths. Beside him, Queen Asabe, radiant despite her exhaustion, cradled their daughter close to her heart. Together, they climbed the steps of the great balcony, where the entire kingdom could see them. A hush fell over the crowd. Thousands of eyes lifted to behold them. A young king, a beloved queen, and the two children who were the promise of a new tomorrow. With one hand, Shedema lifted his son high for all to see. His voice, strong and clear, rolled across the gathering like the song of a mighty river. From today onward, no man or woman shall be judged by the blood in their veins, but by the strength of their heart. This is the will of Zaza under my reign. The people roared their approval, fists raised to the skies. Never again would birth or status define a person's worth. It would be honor. It would be bravery. It would be love. The celebrations that followed were unlike anything seen before. For 7 days and 7 nights, the drums did not cease. For 7 days and 7 nights, the fires burned bright and the food never ran out. Delegations came from neighboring kingdoms, bearing gifts of gold, ivory, horses, and rare silks. Even kings who once plotted against Zaza sent emissaries to kneel before King Shedema, swearing loyalty and friendship. Songs were composed, songs that spoke of a king who chose love over ambition, a queen who rose from humble beginnings, and a kingdom reborn from the ashes of betrayal. Asabe, once a village girl with sweetened millet in her hands, now sat beside her husband not just as a queen, but as the beloved mother of a dynasty. Women wove her face into colorful cloths. Little girls were named after her. Mothers told their daughters, "Be strong like Queen Asabe. Be patient like Queen Asabe. Love like Queen Asabe." Under King Shedema's reign, justice was swift and fair. Thieves and traitors found no refuge. The chiefs who had conspired were long gone. their lands reclaimed for the people, their greed buried with their broken pride. No enemy dared rise again, for they knew Zaza was no longer ruled by fear or favor. It was ruled by love, loyalty, and law. Seasons passed. Crops grew lush and tall. Wells filled with sweet water. Trade flourished. The roads to Zaza became rivers of prosperity, bringing merchants and travelers from distant lands, all eager to bask in the peace and splendor of the kingdom. And in the royal gardens, where once silence and sorrow had crept, laughter now reigned. The twins grew under the watchful eyes of a kingdom that cherished them. The boy, fierce and curious. The girl, wise and kind beyond her years. At sunset, it was common to see Queen Asabe walking hand in hand with her children among the flowering trees, while King Shedema watched with a heart full of gratitude. The memory of the dark days never faded entirely, but neither did the lessons they had taught. They had endured treachery. They had fought injustice. They had reclaimed their destiny with unbreakable love. Their story, the story of a king who refused to bow, of a queen who refused to break, became legend. A story passed from grandmother to grandchild, from teacher to student, from traveler to stranger around distant fires. The story of Zaza, the story of sunrise after storm, the story of how love, pure and fierce, changed the fate of an entire kingdom. And thus, under the radiant dawn of their reign, King Shedema and Queen Asabe built not just a dynasty, but a dream that would live forever. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment.